Free Talk Live.
Okay, so that has completely stopped. I got distracted. Sorry about that. I'm super professional here. Similar to what happened yesterday, except yesterday I wasn't distracted. Welcome, of course, to Free Talkcast, episode number 26, where we talk about news and current events from a perspective of peace, love, and liberty, or at least we attempt to. We try to be consistent. We try to advocate forgiveness, peace, love, and embracing your fellow human beings and coexisting with them instead of creating problems for them. Anyway, yesterday, Richie Rich and I sat down and we recorded for about an hour doing one of the best fucking podcasts we've ever done. It was really good, and I'm not just saying that. But as you see, I have a green screen going on behind me, and on this screen, I had video of a raid that took place on March the 16th of 2021, wherein the FBI targeted like 12 properties in the state of New Hampshire and raided them simultaneously, starting at about 5:45 in the morning. I was one of those properties that was raided by the FBI. The other one was the studio where Ian Freeman also had his house. And the video that I was playing was the video that Ian recorded and compiled and made available for people to watch on the internet. However, what I wasn't aware of, because of the way that OBS, which I was using at the time, I've now switched back to vMix because vMix doesn't have these problems. Because of the way that OBS handles its audio mixing, I had no idea that that video was playing audio. And that whole time that he and I were talking, in the background, not in my headphones, not on my mixer, not lighting up my any of these other knobs that are supposed to light up when things are making noise, none of them, meters, not knobs, none of them were indicating that there was noise coming through, because there wasn't. Even though my headphones, were connected more or less directly to the stereo output of my PC, which isn't the case. They're actually connected to a mixer, and the mixer is receiving on one of its inputs everything from the PC output. It's complicated, and it's really not worth explaining. The point is that I was basically plugged directly into my computer and still getting no indication from OBS that it was playing this audio. And I went to make a quick little video for our supporters over on Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/LRNFM. I just wanted to make a quick little video, as we do, and I heard this audio playing. So I began to look into it, and I found the source of it was that video that I had of the raid that took place on March the 16th. And then it dawned on me that audio would have been playing through the entire podcast recording. So I checked that, and sure enough, regrettably, it was. And maybe an artificial intelligence could take that audio file and take out all of the Russian singing that was going on that Ian put in there for some reason. Maybe. But I don't have that capability. And because of that, the audio is just gone forever. I might upload it in the near future as something like a best podcast episode ever. And, then it'd be kind of a joke because it's completely unlistenable. You can hear Richie Rich and I talking, but you can't understand anything that we're saying. And that's really frustrating. Now, we did talk about some important developments that had happened just in my life in general and in regard to the raid and to Ian Freeman. Now, a quick little backstory. I'm one of the Crypto 6. I'm one of the only 2 Crypto 6 to have gone to federal prison, the other one being Ian Freeman. One of the Crypto 6 had the charges against her dropped early on, and 3 of the others took early plea deals, which allowed them to get out of going to prison, basically, and in return, they were witnesses for the prosecution. And obviously, I was never going to go down like that, so I refused the plea deal. And I insisted that I was going to trial all the way up until about August of 2022, a year and a half later. And this was because my attorney and I filed a motion to dismiss counts 1, 2, and 3. Or in our case, counts 2 and 3. Count 2 was conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, whereas count 3 was operating an unlicensed money transmitting business, because the federal government loves to double dip like that. And if they're going to charge you with the crime, they're also going to charge you with conspiracy to commit that crime. It's crazy, and I know it's double dipping. It allows them to charge you twice for one offense. I know, man. It's fucked up, but that's what they do. Nonetheless, that's exactly what they do. And we argued that these things were unconstitutional. FinCEN had never been authorized by Congress to regulate cryptocurrency. There is no license to sell Bitcoin. Such a thing doesn't exist, was essentially our argument, because Congress had never created a license. FinCEN had just said, oh, you need a money transmitter's license, but what we were transmitting is not money. And that would be like Western Union. You take money to Western Union to send to this person in Nevada, right? That Western Union would be a money transmitter, because they're taking money from you and they're giving it to someone else in a completely different location. That's transmitting money from person A to person B, from location A to location B. But when you're selling Bitcoin, you're not doing any of that. You're selling a product. Like if I had this monster here and you wanted it for whatever reason, you give me $2, I give you the monster. Selling Bitcoin was exactly the same. You give me the money, I give you the Bitcoin. There was no intermediary, there was no third party, so there was no need for a money transmitting license. And this was said on the record by the New Hampshire Banking Commissioner before the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Like, it's possible that if I had operated only within the state of New Hampshire and had never sold Bitcoin to anyone outside of the state of New Hampshire, that I would never have been charged. I don't know that because it's a messy area, but New Hampshire would have never charged me, and I don't think the federal government would have ever had a reason to charge me. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, because we argued that none of that crap was applicable, that this law didn't apply to me because I wasn't transmitting money, that first of all, Bitcoin isn't money because it's made itself completely useless as money, and it doesn't have any of the characteristics that people identify as money having. And secondly, nothing ever actually moves from one person to another or from one location to another when Bitcoin is transacted. This is nomenclature that we use because it presents things in a way that is relatively easy to understand, but it's much more akin to erasing or changing a number in one spreadsheet cell and increasing a number in another spreadsheet cell. Nothing actually moves, nothing transmits, nothing changes except data in a spreadsheet, because that's all cryptocurrency is a glorified encrypted spreadsheet that multiple people can edit at the same time. That's ultimately what cryptocurrency is. And because of that, nothing is ever actually changing. We were going to make these arguments, and we argued that on those bases, the charges against me should be dismissed. And we lost that. And it was at this point when my attorney for the last year and a half had been telling me that I was going to get found guilty, because that's realistic, that's what juries do. They find people guilty. And it doesn't really matter if you're guilty or not, because they don't assess the facts, and they don't sit there and say, there is a reasonable doubt here that this person did not commit the offense. They don't do that. What happens at a trial is the prosecutors tell a narrative. They weave a narrative, they tell a story, they paint you as a type of person, and they paint this story for the jurors. And what your defense does is try to pick apart the facts in the story that the prosecutors are weaving, and simultaneously trying to weave your own story about how the prosecutors are twisting things, except you can't say they're twisting things, even though they are. You can't say that. Instead, you have to create your own narrative and put your own story out there, and then the jury decides which story they are most compelled to believe. That's realistically what happens at a jury trial. That's not the way it's supposed to be, but humans are emotional creatures. We're not robots. You can't feed a bunch of facts into a human being and say, now, make a logical conclusion based on these facts. That doesn't happen. That's not the way people decide things. That's not the way juries decide things. Look, If people decided things on the basis of facts, there would be no socialists in the United States or in the world. There would be no minimum wage. There would be no health insurance because we know all of these things are scams and they're tools used by the elite to make the elite richer and everyone else poorer. And we've seen this time and time again. And you can prove it economically, especially in regard to the minimum wage, that it is a price floor on the cost of labor. You cannot charge any less than that for the labor. That's a price floor. And a price floor, economically speaking, always creates a surplus of that good. Always. 100% of the time. And you can look that up in any economic book. Price floors always create surpluses and price ceilings always create shortages. That's just the way it works. That's basic economics, Econ 101. And when you put when you put a price floor on the cost of labor, you end up with a surplus of labor. What do you call a surplus of labor? You call that unemployment. You call that people not having jobs to do. And it's a direct result of the price floor on the cost of labor. And that is a demonstrable, provable fact. And it doesn't fucking matter. I lost everybody out there when I made that, and I'm never going to persuade them that we need to abolish the minimum wage. No matter how succinctly and how eloquently I can make that argument, you could take Milton Friedman, you don't know who that is. You could insert some well-respected, you could take Taylor Swift and put those words in her mouth and rewrite them so that they are completely eloquent and clear and concise, and you will not persuade a single fucking person that it's a good idea to abolish the minimum wage. You just won't do it. And that's because humans don't cite things on the basis of facts and reason and logic. We simply don't. The vast majority of humans don't. And there are some ways in which everyone does, and then everyone has a blind spot where they won't apply those things. Like I know hardcore libertarians who are totally all facts, logic, and reason all the way. I believe in God. And at that point, they have a blind spot where they refuse to apply rationality and logic and say, oh, yeah, you know what? This stuff about an omnipotent, omniscient creator who sacrificed himself to forgive us for the sins that he made us commit, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And there's no evidence to support it, so I'm going to scrap this belief. Everyone has a blind spot, and that's just one of the most obvious ones. I know plenty of theists, plenty of Christians who are completely logical and who I would trust to make logical conclusions on every other subject, but not that one. And juries are the same way. And I'm sure I have my own blind spots to which I won't apply logic and reason. Everyone does, and I'm part of everyone. Anyway, the point of all of this is to say that juries hear two stories, and then they decide which story they believe, and they vote guilty and not guilty based on that. And the prosecutors are really, really, really good at doing this. And they painted Ian as this person who was turning a blind eye willfully to scam victims in order to enrich himself. They said he turned a blind eye to things, that he knew these things were happening, or that he had good reason. Because I don't think they can say he knew they were happening, but they can say he had good reason to believe that these scams were happening, and yet he continued to sell Bitcoin to some of these people. And by doing all of this, they painted him as someone who knew that these elderly people were being scammed. And of course, he didn't know that. He did everything he could to prevent that. But they painted him as someone who knew these people were being scammed and who didn't care because he relied on the fact that he wasn't the one scamming them to sleep at night. And that's not Ian Freeman. That's not the way all of this worked. But that was the narrative that they painted. And it was very, very successful, especially when they threw in the money laundering charge where an FBI agent pretended to be a drug dealer and tried to buy some Bitcoin from Ian. And Ian's response was, I can't sell you any more Bitcoin, right? Because I know that you're selling drugs. And at this point, probably an FBI agent. But at the very least, it's a drug dealer. And if you take money from them and provide them with a product, you are committing money laundering. And Ian knew that, as did I, as does everyone who sells Bitcoin and who engages in any sort of commercial transaction. If someone tells you that their money came from buying drugs, you can't take that money. You cannot do business with them anymore at that point, or you're committing money laundering. If you don't know that it came from drugs, then you're generally okay. And this is why I didn't want to know where people's money came from, like, I'm not going to lie. I don't have a problem with drug dealers. I don't ethically have any issue with people who want to sell a product that other people want. Would I try to persuade people not to use heroin and meth and these other terribly damaging drugs? Absolutely. But if a person chooses to do those things and someone else wants to sell them those things, those are two consenting adults. I don't know what issue people expect me to have with that from a moral standpoint, but I just can't take one. It's just two people engaging in a voluntary transaction. Maybe I don't approve of that transaction, but there's plenty of people who don't approve of my relationship with a trans man, or even my past relationships with a cis woman or with a cis man. There's plenty of people who don't approve of the consenting relationships that I establish with other adults. So I don't think they should have the right to tell me I can't engage in these activities that I want to engage in. And I don't think I have the right to tell someone else they don't have the ability to engage in the activities that they want to engage in, even if I don't approve of the stuff that they want to do. And I don't approve. I think it's a terrible idea. You're killing yourself and you're destroying your family and friends in the process by using some of these drugs. But if that's the choice you want to make, all I can do is argue against it and try to persuade you otherwise. I have no legal or ethical authority, and it would be morally wrong of me to force you to not do what you want to do. That's just my take on it. And because of that, I don't care on an ethical level if your money came from selling drugs. It is, however, illegal to take money from someone who you know is selling drugs. And this is 100% why I had my don't ask, don't tell policy, because I don't disapprove of people selling drugs. However, I wasn't even charged with money laundering at that point, so it made no difference whatsoever. And there was never any allegation that I sold money to a drug dealer, and because I never did, right? So it was a completely moot point. Everything I just said about my personal feelings on this are completely irrelevant because it never came into play. And I don't know what Ian's personal feelings are on this subject. I suspect they're relatively similar to mine, but I don't know because, believe it or not, even though he and I were both selling Bitcoin and engaging in the same activity in the same place while being very close friends who lived in the same town and who did a radio show together, I know how this sounds, but believe it or not, we never actually discussed how we were going about selling Bitcoin. Like that was just something that we had never discussed. I was selling Bitcoin for like a year before I even knew that he was selling Bitcoin, right? It so happened because we both have these same philosophical ideas and because we are both doing a show where we acquire cryptocurrency that we both were like, okay, well, I have cryptocurrency and I need to turn it into cash to pay my bills. And I believe in what cryptocurrency is doing and that it's making harder for the US government to drop bombs on people and to wage its drug war and to put innocent people in cages and to just engage in all sorts of global hegemony that I don't support. Therefore, I want to help people get more Bitcoin and defund the war machine, right? That when I ran for sheriff in 2020, I actually listed as my public service selling Bitcoin to defund the war machine. And the newspaper at the time ran that as the history of my public service. Because I would argue absolutely that getting people away from the US government's money is a public service. But all of that, not relevant, right? Back to the story. The judge said that the charges wouldn't be dismissed and we were going to go to trial. And for the last year and a half, my attorney had been telling me that I was going to get found guilty. And I believed him. And he was right. I was going to get found guilty if I went to trial. There was nothing to gain by me going to trial except a longer prison sentence. The prosecutors were arguing already for me to go to federal prison. And because I hadn't taken their plea deal, they were really pissed off at me. And weren't willing to offer me anything less than 37 months in federal prison for operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. I accepted the deal because to do otherwise would have meant going to trial and facing probably 6 to 10 years in federal prison. At the time, it looked closer to 15 to 20 years in federal prison. We didn't know that the judge was going to under-sentence us so much, right? But the guidelines suggested 15 to 30 years in prison for me. And I was like, look, if I cannot go to prison for 15 to 30 years by taking this plea deal, and like at that point, your choice is 37 months in prison or 240 months in prison. Which do you choose? It's that matter. You're going to prison, right? At that point, your choice is whether you want 3 years in prison or 20 years in prison. And it's just a simple analysis of risk and benefit. There was no benefit to going to trial. And my work in this area had already been done. And this is something I talked about with Richie Rich yesterday. Ian has an appeal coming up on February the 5th because Ian did go to trial. And he lost, found guilty on all 9 counts, as my attorney and I knew he was going to be, because that's the way that juries work. And that's what my attorney had told me was going to happen. And that's exactly what happened. And if I had gone to trial, I also would have been found guilty of probably then the 5 remaining charges that would have been left against me. And I probably would have gone to prison for 6 years. Ian ended up going to prison for 8 years. That was his sentence, and he's still in prison. I went for 18 months. And I served about 11 of that before I was released. And now I'm on supervised release. Right now, as I'm recording this, I'm still serving my federal sentence for the crime of operating an unlicensed money transmitting business. Okay, Ian, however, is still in prison at the very same facility that I was at when I was held in federal prison. And there was a very realistic possibility if the federal government hadn't screwed up, if the Bureau of Prisons hadn't screwed up, Ian and I would have almost certainly ended up in the same facility, in the same unit. For a time, we were in the same facility, but we were in different units. So we never saw each other or had the potential to see each other. But that was because of a mistake in the BOP where they didn't think that he had a high school diploma, which raised his recidivism level, which put him in a low security facility. Whereas if they had correctly assessed him as having his high school diploma, he would have qualified for a minimum security unit, and would have been placed in the same unit that I was in. So like he was going to end up in the same unit, except they fucked something up. And that was part of the argument that I put forward last month to the judge when I said, look, I should be allowed to contact Ian and visit Ian and talk to Ian over the phone, because like the BOP has forbidden me from doing these things. So has the United States Probation Office. But the motion was to allow the probation office to make the probation office allow me to have contact with Ian Freeman. The Bureau of Prisons is saying no, and USPO is saying no. But the prison allegedly is saying no because they're letting USPO make the decision. That was what I was told, was that the warden had left it up to my probation officer. And my probation officer has said no because that was USPO policy. Are you out of your fucking mind, Aria? You're on federal probation, and you're asking me to contact a convicted felon who is serving a federal prison sentence right now. Really, there's no chance that's going to happen. And like, I totally get that, right? It sounds crazy that I'm requesting that, but I did. And I put in a motion to the judge requesting exactly that. And as of last month, about a week ago, that motion was granted, meaning the USPO no longer has any objection to me having contact with Ian Freeman. Now, I still have to write a letter to the warden, making him aware that, hey, look, the judge is okay with this and USPO is okay with this now, so can I please go back to having contact with Ian Freeman? They will almost certainly not allow me to visit him in federal prison. I think that's probably where they'll say no, but like I know these people like saying no, and I learned when I was in federal prison that if you want to get a yes out of anyone who works in the BOP or any prosecutor or any of these people, what you have to do is give them a way to say yes to what you want and no to something else that you want, right? So if I want a yes to be able to have phone and email contact with Ian, I have to get a no from them about in-person contact with him. And like, it would be great if they allowed me to go there and visit him. That would be fucking amazing, but I don't think they will, right? And I think that's where they'll say no, and they may say no to phone contact as well. I don't know for sure. I think they will almost definitely allow email contact because that's so easily monitored and it's got a paper trail. They will very likely allow phone contact, and they will almost certainly not allow in-person contact. But maybe they will. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I do know, having been in their custody, that they really like telling people no, even on arbitrary, nonsensical, simple, easy shit. They love telling people no. And I have given them now a way to tell me no. Like, for example, when they're searching the cell blocks, when they're searching the unit, they're going to find something to complain about. They're going to, 100%. Like, that's what they're there for. And they're going to do it. And there's always something they can find. So what you do is you give them something to target and complain about and to get on you about, and then they consider their job done, and they walk on to the next cell afterwards. You might, for example, take the chair in your cell and put it in the empty cell across from yours. And so when they come through and look, they'll look around and they'll say, whose chair is this? I'm like, that's mine. Sorry, I left it here. And they'll say, you're not allowed to leave your chair in empty cells. Don't do this again. Get this chair out of here. Take it back to your cell. And you do that, and they're like, all right, they got on you, so their job is done. It's not manipulative. It's giving them what they want. And because of that, they'll leave you alone. And that's how the Bureau of Prisons is. And that's more or less what I'm trying here, except I would love, it's a little chilly in here, by the way, because there's a draft right here where there used to be a dryer and it's plugged up, but there's still a draft here and it's New Hampshire and it's 15 degrees. And I'm hoping that they're going to allow me to visit him in person. It wasn't like a charade or a farce for me to request that. I genuinely want to visit Ian in person. I haven't seen him since that hug on June the 27th of 2023 when I reported to federal prison. And I would love to see him again. And he has an appeal coming up, as I was saying, on February the 5th of next month. Obviously, that's next month at Boston. I believe his attorneys are arguing that he should be allowed to be released pending his appeal. But realistically, there's no chance that's going to happen, especially at this level of court. The First Circuit Court, I think it is, they are very pro-cop and pro-law enforcement. And in their minds, Ian is a duly convicted felon. They're not going to release him, I don't believe. And I don't think that Ian's attorney believes they're going to release him pending his appeal. That would be great. I don't think they're going to. However, there will be a video stream of the appeal. I believe it's going to be live. I'm going in person. And part of that is something else I wanted to talk about. And that's the fact that Ian now has my attorney. My attorney throughout all of this process, the one telling me, look, they're going to find you guilty. This is going to happen. And you need to seriously consider what is best for you because they're going to find you guilty and there's nothing I or you can do to change that. That attorney, the one who was right, the one who filed that incredible motion for dismissal, he is now Ian's attorney because once I was sentenced and in prison, my case came to an end. And he was the best of all of the attorneys involved in this whole process. He is the best attorney I've ever interacted with. And I used to do IT. And a lot of my clients were attorneys, and a lot of them were kind of shady and not good. This guy's not like that. He's great, and he's now Ian's attorney because I filed a couple of waivers and other legal shit that allows him to now represent my co-defendant, and that is. It's not unprecedented, but it's almost unprecedented in the federal system. That is extraordinarily rare for an attorney to go from defending one defendant to defending another defendant in that same case. And that takes a lot of trust. And part of that is because it's true, there is no conflict of interest between me and Ian. I trust him with my life, and I feel fairly confident that he trusts me with his life. I know he's not going to throw me under a bus to save himself, and I'm not going to throw him under a bus to save myself. And luckily, neither of us have the opportunity to throw the other under a bus, but it doesn't change the fact that neither of us is going to go down that particular road of sacrificing the other to save ourselves. Like, the history of this entire trial has proved that, because there was one option for me to weave a narrative that would have allowed me to almost certainly get a not guilty verdict. And this was something my attorney and I discussed very early on, which is the fact that, here you have an obvious trauma victim from an abusive childhood filled with drug addicts and religious abuse and shit that makes the book Carrie look tame, and who is now trans and struggling with that. And from this poverty-stricken background in Mississippi, she came to New Hampshire and built a life for herself, started being successful, and all of this other shit, and got manipulated by Ian, because one of the attorneys actually was saying this kind of shit about Ian in an effort to help her client. This would be nobody. She was saying that Ian was also scamming and deceiving and defrauding his friends this entire time as well. And my attorney and I, he actually brought up the possibility of making this argument, because there could be some lens through which you could look in order to find it to be true. And why I word it that way is I don't think that argument is true. I don't think it has any merit whatsoever. But the facts are there. If you wanted to make that argument that that's what happened, you could say that you believed it and it be plausible, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is I don't think that happened. Obviously, I know that didn't happen. Ian never manipulated me or lied to me or defrauded me or scammed me or cheated me or anything like that, and vice versa. But if someone wanted to make that case, they could. And this is why nobody's attorney was doing that. It doesn't matter whether or not it's factually true, as long as the facts can be looked at in a way that supports that narrative. And yes, my attorney and I could have woven that narrative about me being this trauma abuse victim who came to New Hampshire and was then manipulated and lied to and all this other shit, and probably could have gotten not guilty verdicts for me. But all of that would have been just throwing Ian, not only would it have been deceitful, again, because that's not in any way what actually happened, but not only would it have been deceitful, it would have been throwing my best friend under a fucking bus. Like, it would have been just completely destroying him and destroying our friendship and my reputation, and it would have destroyed my soul to do this. So we dismissed that early on. That was like day 3 of me talking to my attorney, and that was super early on. Once he learned that I wasn't the kind of person to do that sort of thing, he never brought anything like that up again. But clearly some of the other attorneys did bring it up with their clients, and either those clients weren't willing to say, no, absolutely fucking not, and if you say something like that again, I'm going to fire you, or they were on board with it. So that those arguments were made by other attorneys. They were never made by my attorney, but it was a possibility that we discussed. And I was like, well, that's not how I would weave the narrative. That's not how things happened in my point of view. And I would not support you making those arguments in a courtroom. And my attorney and I did butt heads on several of these things repeatedly. And this actually came up at my sentencing, where the judge pointed out that I don't think I fell in with a bad crowd. And my attorney rightfully said, well, yes, Your Honor. And she and I have had many debates about that and many arguments about that, because my attorney wasn't saying that I fell in with a bad crowd, but he was kind of nudging in that direction. And thankfully the judge was like, look, no, your client doesn't believe that. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I absolutely do not believe that. So all of those things could and still did happen, no matter how hard, because it's the attorney's job to do what's the best for their client. And I was his client, and he was trying to do what he felt was best to minimize my prison sentence, even though I had already told him I wasn't okay with that. And luckily there at the sentencing, I was able to say, no, look, I did not fall in with the bad crowd. That's not what happened. That's twisting the narrative, right? Anyway, the motion to dismiss is critically important because that formed the basis of Ian's appeal going forward. And this is another reason I say Richard is the best of the attorneys that were involved here, because if I had taken that early plea deal, this motion would not exist. If I had pled guilty and taken, because it was in April of 2022 when the prosecutors offered me 12 months in prison if I pled guilty to count 3, and they would drop the other charges against me and not bring other charges against me. And I said, no, go fuck yourself. I'm absolutely not pleading guilty. Now, a year-ish later, no, 6 months later-ish, I did plead guilty, but it wasn't to those terms. It was to much harsher terms because they had brought additional charges against me and I had dragged things out and I filed a motion to dismiss. And the judge knew that the only reason I was taking a plea deal was because my motion had been denied. Anyway, that motion did get written, it did get entered, and it did get denied. And because of that, Ian is now able to appeal his guilty verdict. And that's probably the best outcome we could have hoped for this. Like, even though, yes, I took a plea deal, I still provided Ian with the tools that he was going to need to engage in this fight. And that feels good because this, knowing that I took a plea deal and I left Ian there to go to trial alone, it has haunted me since October of 2022. Since I took the plea deal, that has haunted me. And it's going to continue haunting me because like when push came to shove, I jumped off the ship and left Ian to sink alone. And knowing that Ian could not jump off the ship. But it wouldn't have gained anything for me to stay on the ship. No one, it wouldn't have helped Ian. It wouldn't have extended his life. It wouldn't have helped his chances with getting not guilty. It would have benefited no one. And I stayed around long enough for him to have the life raft that he was going to need to appeal his verdict. So that's where things stand. And that's going to happen on February the 5th. And I'm looking forward to it. I don't think, and I would caution people against getting hopeful that Ian is going to win the appeal at this level of court. As I said, they are, you can look up this court and some of the various rulings. They are pro-law enforcement, and they are very conservative. They're not likely to say, you're right, under this new Supreme Court, this would be considered unconstitutional. They're not likely to say that. Only the Supreme Court is likely to say that, and Ian is going to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. But go ahead and steel yourselves against the reality that this is going to make its way to the Supreme Court. This isn't going to end before that. No circuit of court before that is going to be willing to make that precedent. And it's a huge precedent that is going to be set. And I hope that Ian is released pending appeal. I hope he wins on February the 5th. I'm trying to be realistic, and reality, I think, is that he's not likely to be released pending appeal. And like the likeliest scenario is that he's going to have finished serving his federal prison sentence before he is appealing this in front of the Supreme Court. And that sucks. And that's a major issue, but that's a fundamentally broken aspect of the United States penal system and the justice system. So that's where all of that stuff stands. Thank you for listening to me talk for 37 minutes about these updates and the history and what's going on right now and why these things kind of matter. And there was so much more I wanted to get into, like the fact that you may think, oh, well, if you don't do the time, don't do the crime. That's something you hear all the fucking time. Even people in federal prison say that. Like, even people in federal prison would say stuff like, well, I knew I must have done something wrong because the FBI was interrogating me. And it's like, are you fucking out of your mind? Just because they interrogated you, you concluded that you must have done something wrong? And that's the same attitude that most people on juries have. Well, they searched this person, they raided this person, they arrested and charged this person. They must have done something wrong. And that exact mentality is why so many juries vote guilty. It's one of the reasons that so many juries are inclined to believe that the person is guilty and that the prosecutors are weaving the correct narrative because the FBI doesn't make any mistakes. The government couldn't be wrong. They don't make mistakes. They wouldn't spend $5 million in 6 years investigating these people unless they were guilty. And, you end up with guilty verdicts as a result of that. So I realize that's kind of a depressing thought, but it's important to keep in mind that when your grandmother takes her little pills and she puts them in those little trays, AM and PM, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. Well, if she takes those and she goes to her, if she goes across state lines, basically, if she goes to another state with her pills and one of those things, she's committed a federal felony. And it's extremely easy to commit a federal felony. That's just one of thousands of examples I could think of and that I wanted to get into of how easy it is to commit a felony and not even know it. How many people are there here in the state of New Hampshire who are crossing state lines to buy marijuana? Every single time they do that, they're committing a federal felony. And this is happening thousands of times a day here in New Hampshire. And it's not just New Hampshire. People are traveling to Colorado to do it. They're traveling to Oregon to do it. And they're traveling all across a number of state lines in order to buy drugs. And those are all federal felonies. Putting your pills in those little reminder ice tray-like things, federal felony if you travel across state lines. It's remarkably easy. Not having a business license as you're selling Bitcoin, federal felony. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll be back with another episode later this week involving Nikki. I just wanted to get this recorded and get this out there because of what happened yesterday. Very frustrating. So thank you for listening. Check us out, like, share, subscribe, all of that great stuff, because we are still working on building this new YouTube channel. And right now, we're not even showing up in search results, which is really frustrating. But like when you're starting from scratch, that's how things are. So please, it's really important to like the video, share the video, leave a comment, let us know what you think, all of that great stuff. And thank you for listening.